I find missing in BABoK, or maybe not emphasized enough in BABoK. A disclaimer: BABoK is indeed a great attempt in standardizing BA processes. I started my career way back in 1996 as a BA, and we really struggled to have a standardized process for carrying out business analysis activities. I personally have learned a lot and applied many concepts in BABoK to my day to day activities. I have very high regard for BABoK. At the same time, what I'm trying to highlight few aspects which I believe should have been part of BABoK current version and possibly be made as part of BABoK next version. In the first series, what I'm going to discuss is few things that would be helpful for business analysts. One, requirements contexts and sources of requirements. Two, need to make implicit requirements explicit. Three, discovering deep structure from surface structure. In the second part of the video, I would be talking about few techniques that can be very helpful for BAs, such as functional requirements, Kano model, brainstorming paradox, checklist, conflict resolution techniques, and how we can learn a little bit more about these techniques. So first let's understand the term called requirements contexts. It's very interesting to observe this term because when we talk about context, it's usually kind of considered as a very technical term. Context is the prevailing situation that affects our business analysis activities. But context is extremely large. Context can be really humongous. So as a business analyst, we need to distinguish between relevant context and irrelevant context, which means I may have 3,000 stakeholders, but 30 stakeholders really matter to me. The remaining do not matter to me. There can be hundreds of legislations available. Maybe 5 of the legislations apply to me. The remaining 95 does not apply to my project. That is where we distinguish between something called relevant context and irrelevant context. So obviously understanding context is very important and business analysts must understand contexts. Another aspect which I find missing in BABoK is implicit requirements. These are requirements needed but usually not expressed by stakeholders, and often stakeholders are under the impression that the BA knows the requirement. And these requirements can be very dangerous because the stakeholders are believing that the BA already knows them and must have taken care, whereas in reality the BA also doesn't know them. This has happened a couple of times to me as a business analyst as well, thus delaying our projects. Now, to overcome the issues with implicit requirements, we can use checklists and better domain knowledge to discover such implicit requirements. The third aspect that I want to talk is often stakeholders express requirements in natural language, which we convert into models and specifications. And often the stakeholders are expressing it in a way that is kind of subjected to perception, generally ambiguous, and can be interpreted in multiple ways. They also tend to miss certain aspects. So if we know how to kind of find out missing aspects in natural language, we can make our requirements much better. And if you look at this particular one, stakeholders do come from different backgrounds, they have different perspectives, they have different knowledge, and obviously the requirements are ambiguous when they present it. There are 5 interesting processes that happen when stakeholders are expressing the requirements, and these are little hard words, so I'll explain one by another, so don't worry. The intent is to understand deep structures from the surface structures. That is what the stakeholder says and what they haven't said or what we need to discover. So the first one is called nominalization, which is a tendency to combine large number of actions into a single action. Say, for example, the verb manage could actually mean create, retrieve, update, delete, import, export, and many other things. So unless we specify in detail these terms of verbs, the developers are going to do it what they feel right, and which may be different from what stakeholders are expecting. Then nouns with reference index. This happens when we miss the appropriate adjective for a noun. We may say users, whereas we actually may intend to say normal users or super users. So missing the word normal or super can have a different meaning. Third, the dangerous universal quantifiers. Stakeholders tend to use these quantifiers very often, like all, always, every, never. And let's remember that every time somebody says this happens every time, there is definitely an exception. So these are pointers for us to find exceptions in the process. Then, in completely specified condition, stakeholders tend to tell the positive condition most of the time, but they do not tell us what happens when the condition is not met. So, as a BA, we must find out what happens in the positive scenario and what happens in the negative scenario as well. Then there are certain verbs which require two nouns. Usually a single verb requires a single noun, but there are special verbs such as communicate, which means what is being communicated, from where it is being communicated, and to where it is being communicated. So whenever we encounter special verbs, we need to make sure that we are identifying two nouns, not just one noun. So I would stop the part 1 discussion here. I will continue the part 2 discussion to discuss about techniques that are, in my opinion, must have been part of BABoK, but they have been somehow missed in BABoK. And I'm hoping that in the next version of BABoK, they will get included. Thank you for watching this video. My name is MISHRA and this video is from adaptiveus.com.